The wind howled through the cabin walls like a wounded animal, and Donna Taylor pressed her back against the rough-hewn door as the storm outside threatened to tear the mountain apart. Her breath came in short, visible puffs in the frigid air, and she could feel the cold seeping through every crack and crevice of the small structure that had become both her sanctuary and her prison. The fire in the stone hearth had dwindled to barely glowing embers, and she knew that without more wood, she would not survive another night. But outside, somewhere in that howling darkness, she could hear them moving, circling, waiting. The wolves had been growing bolder as winter deepened, and now they seemed to sense her desperation. She clutched the rusted rifle in her trembling hands, knowing she had only 3 bullets left. Knowing that even if her aim was true, there were far more than 3 sets of yellow eyes watching her from the tree line. Her stomach cramped with hunger, a constant companion these past weeks since the last of her preserved meat had run out. The other widows in the valley below had already succumbed to the harsh mountain winter, their bodies discovered frozen in their beds when the spring thaw finally came. Everyone said no woman could survive alone up here when the snows came. Everyone said the mountain claimed its due, but Donna Taylor had refused to die quietly. She had refused to simply lie down and let the cold take her, as it had taken her husband Samuel just 2 months ago. Some in the town below whispered that it was her fault he had died, that her weight had been too much burden for a man trying to work the unforgiving mountain soil. They said she had eaten more than her share while he worked himself to death trying to provide for her. The cruel words had followed her even to his funeral, whispered behind gloved hands and hidden behind false sympathy. Now alone in the cabin that Samuel had built with his own hands, she faced the truth that perhaps they had been right. Perhaps she was too much, too heavy, too hungry for this harsh world. But even as these thoughts threatened to crush her spirit, something deep inside her rebelled against the idea of simply giving up. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. She had survived this long, and she would not let the mountain or the wolves or the memory of those cruel whispers be the end of her story. The sound of splintering wood made her heart stop. One of the shutters on the window had given way to the wind, and now snow was beginning to blow into the cabin, extinguishing what little warmth remained from the dying fire. She had to make a choice, and she had to make it now. Stay inside and freeze to death, or venture out into the storm to gather wood and risk becoming prey to the pack that waited in the darkness. But this moment of desperate decision had not come without warning. The story of how Donna Taylor had arrived at this crossroads began 3 months earlier, when the first snows of autumn had just begun to dust the peaks of the mountain range that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. Samuel Thomas had been a good man, perhaps too good for the harsh realities of mountain life. He had married Donna not for her beauty, which the town's cruel tongue said had long since been buried under layers of flesh, but for her kindness, her gentle spirit, and her unwavering loyalty. While other men in the settlement below looked for Rus who could work the fields from dawn to dusk without complaint, Samuel had seen something different in Donna's warm brown eyes. He had seen a woman who would make their small cabin a home, who would tend to him when he was sick, who would stand by him through the lean times that mountain living inevitably brought. Their marriage had been a quiet affair, attended by only a few neighbors who whispered among themselves about the unlikely pairing. Samuel was tall and lean, weathered by years of hard work, while Donna was soft and round, her body telling the story of a life that had known enough food and comfort before she had come to this unforgiving place. But Samuel had never made her feel ashamed of her size, had never looked at her with anything but affection and respect. The cabin they shared sat on a small plateau halfway up the mountain, accessible only by a narrow trail that became treacherous when the snows came. Samuel had chosen the location for its natural protection from the worst of the winter winds, and for the small spring that provided fresh water year-round. He had built the cabin with his own hands, cutting each log and fitting each stone with the meticulous care of a man who understood that shoddy work could mean death in the mountains. For 2 years, they had lived a simple but contented life. Samuel would hunt and trap in the forests, tending to their small garden during the brief mountain growing season, while Donna kept house and preserved what food they could gather for the long winter months. She had learned to cure meat, to dry vegetables, to make the most of every resource the mountain provided. Her skills in the kitchen had been legendary even before her marriage, And Samuel often said that her cooking alone was worth braving any storm to come home to. But the mountain was not kind to those who showed weakness, and Samuel's body began to betray him during their second winter together. What started as a persistent cough became something deeper, more troubling. By spring, he was spitting blood, and by the following autumn, he could barely make it up the trail to their cabin without stopping to rest. The nearest doctor was 3 days' ride down the mountain, and even if they could have made the journey, they had no money for medical treatment. Donna watched her husband waste away despite her best efforts to nurse him back to health. She fed him the choicest portions of their meat, the richest broth she could make from their dwindling supplies. She sat up with him through the long nights when his coughing kept him awake, bathing his fevered brow and whispering words of comfort. But nothing she did seemed to help, and she began to realize that she was watching the man she loved slowly die. The people in the settlement below began to talk, as people always did when tragedy struck. They said that Donna was eating her husband out of house and home, that she was taking food from his mouth to feed her own endless appetite. They said that a woman of her size had no business living on the mountain, where every calorie had to be earned through backbreaking labor. Some even suggested that Samuel would recover if he could just get away from the burden of providing for her. These whispers reached Donna's ears through the few neighbors who still visited, usually delivered with false concern and thinly veiled malice. Each cruel word cut deeper than the last, and she began to see herself through their eyes, began to wonder if perhaps they were right. She started eating less, giving Samuel larger portions even as her own stomach growled with hunger. But her sacrifice seemed to make no difference in his condition, and the guilt of her supposed gluttony weighed on her like a physical burden. Samuel, weakened though he was, noticed the change in his wife. He saw how she picked at her food, how she turned away when he offered to share his portion with her. One evening, as the first heavy snows of their final winter together began to fall, he confronted her about it. "Donna," he said, his voice hoarse from coughing, "you're not eating enough. I can see you getting thinner." She looked up from the mending in her lap, her needle poised over a tear in his work shirt. "I'm eating plenty," she lied, forcing a smile. "You need to keep your strength up more than I do." Samuel studied her face in the flickering firelight, and she could see that he wasn't fooled by her reassurance. "What have they been saying to you down in the settlement?" he asked quietly. Donna's hands stilled on the mending, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks despite the cold air that seemed to permeate every corner of the cabin. "Nothing that matters," she said, but her voice betrayed her. "Tell me," Samuel insisted, and there was a firmness in his voice that reminded her of the strong man he had been before the sickness took hold. So she told him, haltingly at first, then with growing emotion as the words poured out of her. She told him about the whispered comments, the meaningful looks, the suggestions that she was somehow responsible for his decline. She told him how the other women in the settlement looked at her with a mixture of pity and disgust, how the men averted their eyes as if her very presence was an embarrassment. Samuel listened in silence until she finished, and then he was quiet for so long that she began to wonder if he had fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with anger. "Those fools," he said, "those ignorant, cruel fools." He struggled to sit up straighter in his chair, and Donna moved to help him, but he waved her away. "Listen to me," he said, fixing her with an intense gaze. "You are not the reason I'm sick. This thing in my lungs, this weakness, it would have come whether you were here or not. But having you here, having your love and your care, that's the only thing that's kept me going this long." Tears began to flow down Donna's cheeks, and she tried to speak, but Samuel continued. "You are strong, Donna, stronger than any of those people down in the settlement. They look at you and see only what they want to see, but I know who you really are. You're the woman who nursed me through the fever last spring. You're the woman who walked 5 miles in a blizzard to gather herbs when I couldn't stop coughing. You're the woman who has never once complained about this hard life, never once made me feel like I wasn't providing enough." He paused to catch his breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was urgent. "Promise me something," he said. "Promise me that when I'm gone, you won't let their words make you believe you're less than you are. Promise me you'll survive, no matter what they say, no matter how hard it gets." Donna wanted to protest, to tell him that he wasn't going to die, that they would find a way through this together. But she could see the truth in his eyes, could hear it in the rattle of his breathing. So instead, she nodded and whispered, "I promise." Samuel died 3 weeks later, on a bitter cold morning when the wind was howling down from the peaks like a living thing. Donna found him in their bed, peaceful at last, his face relaxed in a way it hadn't been for months. She sat with him for a long time, holding his cold hand and remembering the promises they had made to each other, the dreams they had shared, the quiet moments of happiness that had made their hard life worthwhile. The funeral was a sparse affair. The weather was too harsh for many people to make the journey up the mountain, and those who did come seemed more interested in discussing what would become of the widow than in mourning the dead. Donna heard them talking among themselves, speculating about whether she would come down to the settlement to live with relatives, whether anyone would be willing to take in a woman of her size and limited means. But Donna had no intention of leaving the cabin that Samuel had built for them. This was her home, the place where they had been happy together, and she would not abandon it to satisfy the expectations of people who had never understood their love. She had made a promise to her husband, and she intended to keep it. The first month after Samuel's death was the hardest. Grief sat on her chest like a physical weight, making it difficult to breathe, difficult to find the motivation to do the daily tasks that survival required. She found herself talking to Samuel as if he were still there, asking his advice about which traps to check, which wood to burn, how to ration the food supplies they had laid in for winter. Slowly, painfully, she began to adapt to life alone. She learned to set and check the rabbit snares that Samuel had taught her about, though her success rate was poor at first. She learned to split wood, though the heavy axe was difficult for her to wield effectively. She learned to bank the fire at night so that it would burn slowly and last until morning, conserving the precious fuel that would have to see her through until spring. But as winter deepened and the snows grew heavier, Donna began to realize that knowledge and determination might not be enough. The traps that had provided Samuel with a steady supply of fresh meat yielded little for her. Whether it was her inexperience, her scent on the snares, or simply bad luck, the rabbits and other small game seemed to avoid her efforts. The preserved meat that had seemed like a generous supply when Samuel was alive began to dwindle alarmingly when it became her only source of protein. She tried to supplement her diet with the dried vegetables and grains they had stored, but without fresh meat, she found herself growing weaker as the weeks passed. The cold seemed to penetrate deeper into her bones, and tasks that had once been merely difficult became nearly impossible. Chopping wood left her exhausted and shaking, and she began to ration her fuel more and more strictly, letting the cabin grow cold for hours at a time to make her supply last longer. It was during one of these cold, dark periods that she first heard the wolves. Their howls echoed off the mountain walls, seeming to come from all directions at once. Samuel had told her that wolves rarely bothered humans unless they were desperate. But as the winter wore on and prey became scarce, even the most cautious predators might be driven to take risks they would normally avoid. The sound of their voices in the night made her feel more alone than ever. She would lie in bed, wrapped in every blanket she owned, listening to their haunting calls and wondering if they could smell her fear, her weakness. Sometimes she imagined she could see their eyes glowing in the darkness beyond the windows, watching and waiting for their opportunity. As her food supplies continued to diminish, Donna made the difficult decision to venture down the mountain to the settlement. She had been avoiding contact with the people there since Samuel's funeral, knowing that she would face questions and judgment that she wasn't ready to handle. But survival had to take precedence over pride, and she hoped that she might be able to trade some of her household goods for food to see her through the rest of the winter. The journey down the mountain was treacherous. The trail was covered with snow and ice, and in several places, she had to crawl on her hands and knees to avoid slipping over the edge into the valley below. By the time she reached the settlement, she was exhausted and half frozen, her clothes soaked through with snow and sweat. The reception she received was even worse than she had feared. The storekeepers looked at her with barely concealed disdain, offering insultingly low prices for the quilts and household items she had brought to trade. The women she had once considered neighbors whispered among themselves as she passed, their words clearly audible and deliberately cruel. "Look at her," she heard one woman say to another. "Still fat as a pig even after her husband died working himself to death to feed her." "Shameful," came the reply. "She should have the decency to waste away like a proper widow." Donna felt each word like a physical blow, but she forced herself to continue with her business, trading what she could for the small amount of food the merchants were willing to give her. It wasn't enough, not nearly enough to last through the remaining months of winter, but it was better than nothing. The journey back up the mountain was even more difficult than the descent had been. The small pack of supplies felt impossibly heavy on her back, and she had to stop frequently to rest. Darkness was falling by the time she reached her cabin, and she could hear the wolves howling somewhere in the distance, closer than they had ever been before. That night, as she sat by her meager fire eating a thin soup made from the few vegetables she had been able to obtain, Donna made a decision that would change everything. She would not go back to the settlement. She would not subject herself to their cruelty again, would not beg for scraps from people who saw her as less than human. Whatever happened, she would face it here, in the home she and Samuel had shared, with whatever dignity she could maintain. But dignity, she was learning, was a luxury that survival rarely afforded. As the weeks passed and her new supplies dwindled, she found herself eating things she would never have considered before. She boiled leather scraps to make a bitter, chewy broth. She gathered pine needles to make tea that provided some vitamin C but no real sustenance. She even tried eating bark, as Samuel had once told her the native peoples did in times of famine. But it made her violently ill and she abandoned the attempt. The wolves grew bolder as she grew weaker. She began to see them during the day, gray shapes moving through the trees around her cabin. They seemed to be studying her, learning her routines, waiting for the right moment to strike. She started carrying the rifle with her whenever she left the cabin, even for simple tasks like gathering firewood or checking the empty snares. It was on a particularly bitter morning in late February that Donna first saw the mountain man. She had ventured out to gather what little firewood she could find, her movements slow and deliberate as she tried to conserve her dwindling energy. The snow was knee-deep, and each step was an effort that left her breathing hard in the thin mountain air. She was bent over, trying to pull a fallen branch from beneath a snowdrift, when she heard the sound of approaching footsteps. Her first instinct was fear. The wolves had been circling closer each day, and she had begun to wonder if they might attack even in daylight. But when she looked up, rifle clutched in her trembling hands, she saw not a wolf but a man. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in heavy furs and leather that spoke of years spent in the wilderness. His beard was dark and full, streaked with gray, and his eyes were the color of winter sky, pale and penetrating. For a long moment they stared at each other across the small clearing. Donna's heart hammered in her chest, and she realized that a human stranger might be even more dangerous than wolves. There were stories of men who lived alone in the mountains, men who had turned their backs on civilization and its rules. Some said such men were little better than animals themselves, capable of any violence or cruelty. But as the seconds stretched on, the man made no threatening move. Instead, he seemed to be studying her with an expression that might have been concern. His gaze took in her gaunt face, her trembling hands. The way she swayed slightly on her feet as if standing upright was an effort. "Ma'am," he said finally, his voice rough from disuse but not unkind, "you look like you could use some help." Donna's first impulse was to refuse, to maintain the pretense that she was managing fine on her own. Pride was all she had left, and she was reluctant to surrender it to a stranger. But even as she opened her mouth to decline his offer, her body betrayed her. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she staggered, nearly falling into the snow. The man moved quickly, covering the distance between them in a few long strides. He caught her arm, steadying her, and she could feel the strength in his grip even through the thick gloves he wore. "When did you last eat?" he asked. And there was something in his tone that reminded her of Samuel, a gentle authority that made it difficult to lie. "Yesterday," she said, though it wasn't entirely true. She had had a few spoonfuls of broth the day before, but it had been several days since she had eaten anything that could properly be called a meal. The man who had introduced himself as Wayne Clark studied her face with those pale eyes, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see right through her deception. "My cabin's about a mile from here," he said. "I've got food and a warm fire. You're welcome to share both." Every instinct told Donna to refuse. She knew nothing about this man, had no reason to trust him beyond his apparent concern for her welfare. But she also knew that she was dying, slowly but surely starving to death in the cabin that had once been her sanctuary. The choice was between taking a risk with a stranger or facing certain death alone. "I don't want charity," she said, trying to inject some strength into her voice. Wayne nodded as if he had expected this response. "Not charity," he said. "Trade, I've been living alone up here for all 5 years, and I'm a poor cook at best. You help me prepare some decent meals, and I'll share what I've got. Fair exchange." It was a face-saving offer, and they both knew it. Donna was in no condition to be much help with anything, let alone cooking, but it gave her a way to accept his help without feeling like she was begging. And for that, she was grateful. The walk to Wayne's cabin was one of the most difficult journeys Donna had ever made. Even with his support, she found herself stopping frequently to catch her breath, her legs shaking with the effort of moving through the deep snow. Wayne was patient, never hurrying her, never making her feel like a burden. When she stumbled, he was there to steady her. When she needed to rest, he waited without complaint. His cabin was larger than the one she shared with Samuel, built into the side of a rocky outcropping that provided natural protection from the wind. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the windows glowed with warm yellow light that seemed like the most beautiful sight she had ever seen. The smell that greeted her when he opened the door was heavenly, rich and meaty, and complex in a way that made her mouth water and her stomach clench with desperate hunger. The interior of the cabin was spartanly furnished but clean and well-maintained. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking pot suspended over the flames. Shelves lined the walls, filled with preserved foods, tools, and books. It was clearly the home of a man who valued function over comfort, but it was warm and dry and safe, and that was more than Donna had felt in weeks. Wayne guided her to a chair near the fire and began ladling something from the pot into a wooden bowl. The smell that rose from it was so enticing that Donna had to clench her hands together to keep from snatching the bowl away from him before he was finished. When he finally handed it to her, she forced herself to take small, careful sips, knowing that eating too much too quickly after days of near starvation could make her violently ill. The stew was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. It was rich with meat and vegetables, seasoned with herbs that she couldn't identify, but that spoke of skill and knowledge that went far beyond basic survival cooking. Each spoonful seemed to spread warmth through her body, and she could feel strength beginning to return to her limbs. Wayne watched her eat without comment, occasionally refilling her bowl when it emptied. He ate his own meal in silence, but Donna was aware of his eyes on her, studying her with that same careful attention he had shown in the clearing. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her, whether he was judging her as the people in the settlement had, whether he was wondering how someone like her had ended up alone on the mountain. When she had eaten as much as her shrunken stomach could hold, Wayne cleared away the bowls and poured her a cup of tea that tasted of pine and mint and something else she couldn't identify. The warmth of it seeped through her, and for the first time in weeks, she felt truly comfortable. "Your husband," Wayne said quietly, breaking the silence that had settled between them. "I heard he died. I'm sorry for your loss." Donna nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Even now, months after Samuel's death, talking about him was difficult. The grief was still too raw, too close to the surface. "You've been alone up there all winter?" Wayne continued, and there was something in his tone that made it clear he already knew the answer. "Yes," Donna said, her voice barely above a whisper. Wayne was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his words surprised her. "That takes courage," he said, "more courage than most people have." Donna looked up at him, startled. It was not what she had expected to hear. The people in the settlement had called her stubborn, foolish, too proud for her own good. No one had ever suggested that her decision to stay on the mountain alone might be brave. "The folks down in the settlement," Wayne continued, "they think they know what's best for everyone. They think anyone who doesn't live the way they live, think the way they think, must be wrong. But they don't understand what it takes to survive up here. They don't understand that sometimes the hardest choice is also the right one." His words touched something deep inside Donna, a part of her that had been wounded by months of criticism and judgment. For the first time since Samuel's death, she felt like someone might actually understand her decision to stay on the mountain, might see it as something other than foolish pride. "How did you know?" she asked. "About Samuel, I mean." Wayne shrugged. Shrugged. "Word travels, even up here. And I saw the smoke from your chimney stop for a few days back in December. When it started up again, I figured it was just you." The implication of his words sank in slowly. He had been watching from a distance, keeping track of whether she was alive or dead. The thought should have been unsettling, but instead, she found it oddly comforting. In a place where death could come quickly and without warning, having someone who noticed whether you were still breathing felt like a form of protection. "Why didn't you come sooner?" she asked. Wayne was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally answered, his voice was thoughtful. "Didn't want to intrude," he said. "Figured you had your reasons for staying up there alone. Figured you'd ask for help if you needed it. And today? Today I could see you were past asking," he said simply. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. Donna felt more relaxed than she had in months, her belly full and her body warm. But underneath the comfort was a growing awareness that this respite was temporary. Eventually, she would have to return to her own cabin, to the cold and the hunger and the wolves that waited in the darkness. As if reading her thoughts, Wayne spoke again. "Storm's coming," he said, nodding toward the window where snow had begun to fall more heavily. "Big one, by the look of it. You're welcome to stay here until it passes." Donna's first instinct was to refuse, to insist that she needed to get back to her own cabin. But the warmth and safety of Wayne's home was seductive after so many weeks of cold and fear. And the thought of venturing out into a blizzard, weak as she still was, filled her with dread. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. Wayne looked at her with those pale eyes, and she thought she saw a hint of amusement in them. "Lady," he said, "if you were a burden, I wouldn't have offered." The storm that Wayne had predicted arrived with a vengeance, howling down from the peaks with a fury that made Donna grateful to be safe inside the sturdy cabin. Snow piled up against the windows, and the wind shook the walls with such force that she wondered if even Wayne's well-built home could withstand it. But the cabin held firm, and the fire continued to burn brightly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. For 3 days, the blizzard raged, trapping them inside together. At first, Donna felt awkward and self-conscious, acutely aware that she was imposing on a man she barely knew. But Wayne seemed genuinely unconcerned by her presence, going about his daily routines as if having a guest was the most natural thing in the world. She tried to make herself useful, preparing meals with the abundant supplies Wayne had stored for winter. It felt good to cook again, to create something nourishing and flavorful from simple ingredients. Wayne ate her food with obvious appreciation, often asking about her techniques or the herbs she used. It became clear that his earlier comment about being a poor cook had been accurate. His usual meals were functional but bland, designed for sustenance rather than pleasure. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Wayne asked one evening as they shared a meal of venison stew seasoned with wild herbs. "My mother," Donna replied. "She said that a woman who could cook well would never go hungry, and a man who had a good cook for a wife would never stray." She paused, remembering. She was right about the first part anyway. Wayne studied her face in the firelight. "Your husband was a fool if he ever looked elsewhere," he said quietly. The simple sincerity of his words brought tears to Donna's eyes. Samuel had never strayed, had never given her reason to doubt his love. But the people in the settlement had often implied that a man married to a woman like her would naturally seek companionship elsewhere. To hear Wayne dismiss such ideas so matter-of-factly was more healing than she had expected. As the days passed, they began to talk more freely. Wayne told her about his life before the mountain, how he had been a soldier in the war, how he had returned home to find his family dead from disease and his farm sold for taxes. The mountains had offered him a refuge from a world that had taken everything he cared about, and he had been living alone here ever since. "Don't you get lonely?" Donna asked. Wayne considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but loneliness is better than being around people who make you feel alone, even when you're not." Donna understood exactly what he meant. She had felt more isolated in the settlement, surrounded by neighbors who judged and whispered, than she ever had in her cabin on the mountain. On the third night of the storm, As they sat by the fire sharing a pot of pine needle tea, Wayne asked her about her plans. "When this weather clears," he said, "what will you do?" It was a question Donna had been avoiding, even in her own thoughts. The truth was that she had no real plan beyond surviving each day as it came. Her food supplies were nearly exhausted, her strength was still fragile, and winter was far from over. "Go back to my cabin, I suppose," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Wayne was quiet for a moment. "You know you won't make it through the rest of winter alone," he said gently. "Not with things as they are." Donna bristled at his words, even though she knew they were true. "I've made it this far," she said. "Barely," Wayne replied, and his bluntness stung even though it was accurate. "You were half dead when I found you. Another week, maybe two, and you would have been." The truth of his assessment hung between them like a physical presence. Donna wanted to argue, to insist that she would have found a way to survive, but she couldn't make herself believe it, let alone convince him. "What are you suggesting?" she asked. Wayne stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. "Stay here," he said simply. "Through the rest of winter, anyway. I've got enough food for two and the cabin's warm and safe. When spring comes, you can decide what you want to do then." The offer was generous, more generous than she had any right to expect from a man she had known for only 3 days. But it also represented a fundamental change in her life, an admission that she couldn't survive on her own, that the independence she had fought so hard to maintain was an illusion. "I can't," she said. "People would talk. A widow living alone with a man who isn't her husband. It wouldn't be proper." Wayne's laugh was short and bitter. "The same people who've been saying you should starve to death rather than be a burden? The same people who think you killed your husband by eating too much? You're worried about what they'll think?" His words hit home because they were true. The people who would condemn her for accepting Wayne's help were the same ones who had shown her no kindness when she needed it most. Their opinions had already caused her enough pain. Why should she continue to let them dictate her choices? But even as logic told her to accept Wayne's offer, something deeper resisted. She had made a promise to Samuel, a promise to survive no matter what. But she had also promised to maintain her dignity, to not let the cruel words of others make her believe she was less than she was. Accepting charity, even well-intentioned charity, felt like a betrayal of that promise. "I need to think about it," she said finally. Wayne nodded as if he had expected this response. "Take all the time you need," he said. "But think about this too. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept help when it's offered." The storm finally broke on the fourth day, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Drifts piled higher than Donna's head blocked the cabin door, and Wayne had to dig them out before they could venture outside. The air was crystalline and still, so clear that the mountains in the distance seemed close enough to touch. But underneath the beauty was a reminder of the harsh reality they faced. The snow was deep enough to make travel difficult, and more storms would surely follow before winter loosened its grip on the mountain. Wayne accompanied Donna back to her cabin, carrying a pack full of food that he insisted was payment for the meals she had prepared during her stay. The journey was difficult, even with snowshoes and Wayne's help, and by the time they reached her small home, Donna was exhausted. The cabin felt impossibly cold and empty after the warmth and companionship of Wayne's home. The fire had long since died, and ice crystals covered the inside of the windows. It would take hours to warm the space enough to be comfortable, and even then it would never feel as safe and secure as Wayne's larger, better-built dwelling. Wayne helped her restart the fire and checked the cabin for any damage from the storm. A section of roof had leaked, leaving a puddle of ice on the floor near her bed, and one of the window shutters had blown loose and would need to be repaired. These were problems that Samuel would have fixed quickly and easily, but for Donna, they represented potentially insurmountable challenges. "I'll come back tomorrow and fix that shutter," Wayne said, as if reading her thoughts. "And I'll bring some tar to patch that leak." Donna wanted to refuse, to insist that she could manage on her own, but the words wouldn't come. She was beginning to understand that accepting help wasn't necessarily a sign of weakness, that sometimes it was simply a recognition of reality. "Thank you," she said instead. Wayne nodded and turned to leave, but at the door, he paused. "The offer stands," he said without looking back, "if you change your mind." After he left, Donna sat alone in her slowly warming cabin and tried to make sense of her situation. She had food enough for perhaps 2 weeks thanks to Wayne's generosity. But what would happen when that ran out? Could she swallow her pride enough to ask for more help? Could she accept the fact that her dream of independent survival was just that, a dream? That night, as she lay in her bed listening to the wind howl around the cabin, she heard the wolves again. They sounded closer than ever, and she wondered if they had grown bolder during the storm, if they were beginning to see her small cabin as potential prey rather than a threat to be avoided. The next morning brought Wayne back, as promised, along with the tools and materials needed to repair her cabin. He worked efficiently and without complaint, patching the leak in her roof and securing the loose shutter. When he was finished, he shared a simple meal with her, eating the soup she had prepared from some of the supplies he had brought. "Wolves were active last night," he said as they ate. "Found tracks all around your cabin this morning. Big pack, maybe 8 or 10 animals." The news sent a chill through Donna that had nothing to do with the cold. She had heard them, but knowing they had actually been circling her home made the threat feel much more real and immediate. "They're getting desperate," Wayne continued. "Game's been scarce this winter, and they're starting to take risks they normally wouldn't. Won't be long before they try to get inside somewhere looking for food." The implication was clear. Her small cabin, with its single occupant and meager defenses, would be an attractive target for hungry wolves. Wayne's larger, more secure home would be much safer. "How long do you think it will be before they try something?" Donna asked. Wayne shrugged. "Hard to say. Could be days, could be weeks. But they're getting bolder every night. Sooner or later, they'll decide the risk is worth it." That evening, after Wayne had returned to his own cabin, Donna sat by her fire and tried to make a decision that could determine whether she lived or died. Her pride told her to stay, to face whatever came with dignity and independence. Her practical mind told her that pride was a luxury she could no longer afford, that survival had to take precedence over everything else. She thought about Samuel, about the promise she had made to him. He had asked her to survive, no matter what it took. He had also asked her not to let the cruel words of others make her believe she was less than she was. But maybe accepting help when it was genuinely offered wasn't a sign of weakness. Maybe it was a sign of strength, a recognition that true independence sometimes meant knowing when to rely on others. The decision came to her in the early hours of the morning, when the howling of the wolves seemed to shake the very walls of her cabin. She could hear them moving around outside, snuffling at the door, testing the shutters with their claws. The rifle lay across her knees, loaded and ready, but she knew that 3 bullets would not be enough if they decided to make a serious attempt to get inside. As dawn broke, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, Donna made her choice. She would accept Wayne and his offer, not as charity but as a partnership between two people who understood the harsh realities of mountain life. She would contribute what she could, her skills in cooking and keeping house, and in return, she would have the safety and security that might keep her alive until spring. The wolves had left tracks everywhere around her cabin, proof that Wayne's assessment of the threat had been accurate. Some of the prints were so close to her door that she could see the individual claw marks in the snow. If they returned tonight, and if they were desperate enough, they might well find a way inside. She packed quickly, taking only what she could carry easily. Her few precious possessions, the quilt she had made with her own hands, the small portrait of Samuel that sat on her mantel, the worn Bible that had been her mother's. Everything else, the furniture that Samuel had built, the dishes they had eaten from, the bed where they had slept together, would have to be left behind. The journey to Wayne's cabin was easier this time, her pack light and her purpose clear. She found him outside, splitting wood for his fire, and the sight of him working with steady, efficient movements filled her with a sense of security she hadn't felt in months. "I've decided to accept your offer," she said without preamble. Wayne straightened, setting down his axe, and studied her face. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him, because he nodded once and said, "Good, I was hoping you would." There was no drama in the moment, no grand speeches or emotional declarations. It was simply a practical decision made by two practical people who understood what it took to survive in a harsh world. But as Wayne helped her carry her belongings into his cabin, Donna felt something shift inside her, a loosening of the tight knot of fear and desperation that had been her constant companion for so long. The days that followed settled into a comfortable routine. Donna took over the cooking and much of the housekeeping, tasks that came naturally to her, and that Wayne seemed genuinely grateful to have taken off his hands. In return, she had warmth, safety, and food enough to begin rebuilding her strength. Wayne was an easy man to live with, quiet and considerate, never making her feel like an intruder in his space. He had his routines, checking his traps each morning, maintaining his equipment, reading by the fire in the evenings, but he adapted them easily to accommodate her presence. They talked sometimes, sharing stories of their pasts and their thoughts about the future, but they were equally comfortable in silence. As the weeks passed, Donna began to feel like herself again. The constant gnawing hunger that had been her companion for so long faded away, replaced by the satisfaction of regular, nourishing meals. Her strength returned gradually, and with it, her confidence. She was still the same woman who had refused to give up when everyone expected her to die, but now she was also a woman who had learned that accepting help was not the same as giving up. The wolves continued to be a presence in their lives, their howls echoing through the night and their tracks appearing regularly around the cabin. But Wayne's home was too well built and too well defended for them to pose a serious threat. The thick log walls and secure shutters kept them out, and Wayne's reputation as a skilled hunter and marksman was apparently well known even among the wildlife. One evening in late March, as they sat by the fire sharing a meal of rabbit stew, Wayne brought up a subject that had been hovering unspoken between them for weeks. "Spring will be here soon," he said. "Ice is starting to break up in the streams, and I saw geese flying north yesterday. Won't be long before the pass opens up and travel gets easier." Donna nodded, though the thought of spring brought mixed emotions. She was eager to see the end of winter, to feel warm sun on her face again, and to see green things growing. But spring would also bring decisions about her future, choices about where she would go and how she would live. "I've been thinking," Wayne continued, "about what happens next, for both of us." Donna set down her spoon and looked at him, waiting for him to continue. "This arrangement we have," he said, "it's worked out well, better than I expected, if I'm being honest. I've eaten better these past few weeks than I have in years, and the cabin's never been so comfortable. You've earned your keep, and then some." "Thank you," Donna said, though she wasn't sure where he was leading. Wayne was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, as if he were choosing his words with great precision. "I was wondering if you might consider making this permanent, not just through winter, but for good." The suggestion hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither of them had voiced before. Donna felt her heart begin to race, though whether from excitement or anxiety, she couldn't say. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. Wayne looked directly at her then, his pale eyes serious and intent. "Marriage," she said simply. "A real partnership, not just a temporary arrangement. You've proven you can handle life up here, and I think we work well together. We could build a good life, if you're willing." Donna stared at him, momentarily speechless. In all her thoughts about the future, this possibility had never occurred to her. She had assumed that when spring came, she would have to find some other solution to her situation. Perhaps moving to a town where she could find work. Perhaps accepting the charity of distant relatives who would take her in out of duty rather than affection. "I know it's not a romantic proposal," Wayne continued, perhaps interpreting her silence as rejection. "I'm not pretending to offer you the kind of love story that young girls dream about, but I think we could have something good together, something real and lasting." "What about the people in the settlement?" Donna asked. "They already think poorly of me. If I marry again so soon after Samuel's death, and to a man like you, a mountain man they barely know, they'll have even more to say." Wayne's expression hardened slightly. "Since when do you care what those people think?" he asked. "They've never shown you anything but cruelty. Why should their opinions matter now?" He was right, of course. The people who would judge her for remarrying were the same ones who had judged her for everything else, who had blamed her for her husband's death and mocked her for her size and her choices. Their approval was not something she had ever been able to earn, no matter how hard she tried. "It's not that simple," she said. "Samuel has only been dead for 4 months. People expect a proper mourning period." "Samuel's been dead long enough for you to nearly starve to death," Wayne replied bluntly. If he loved you the way you say he did, do you think he would want you to suffer for the sake of appearances? The question struck home because Donna knew the answer. Samuel had been a practical man who valued substance over form. He would have wanted her to be happy and safe, not to waste away in lonely misery for the sake of social conventions that had never served her well. I need time to think, she said. Wayne nodded. Of course, it's a big decision, but don't take too long. Spring will be here soon, and if you decide you don't want to stay, you'll need time to make other arrangements. That night, Donna lay awake in the small alcove that had become her sleeping space, staring up at the ceiling and trying to sort through her feelings. The practical part of her mind recognized that Wayne's proposal was a good solution to her problems. He was a decent man, a skilled provider, someone who treated her with respect and kindness. Life with him would be secure and comfortable, if not passionate. But another part of her rebelled against the idea of remarrying so soon after Samuel's death. Not because of what others might think, but because it felt like a betrayal of the love she had shared with her first husband. Samuel had been the love of her life, the man who had seen past her physical appearance to the woman beneath. How could she pledge herself to another man when Samuel's memory was still so fresh and painful? Yet as the night wore on, she began to realize that her feelings for Wayne were different from what she had felt for Samuel, but no less real. Where Samuel had inspired passion and romantic love, Wayne offered something steadier and perhaps more valuable: acceptance, partnership, and genuine respect. He had seen her at her lowest point, weak and desperate and half dead from starvation, and he had still chosen to help her. More than that, he had chosen to value her contributions, to see her as an equal partner, rather than a burden to be endured. The next morning, Wayne left early to check his traps, giving Donna space to think without feeling pressured by his presence. She spent the day going about her usual tasks, cooking and cleaning and tending the fire, but her mind was elsewhere, weighing options and possibilities. When Wayne returned that evening, carrying 2 fat rabbits and a smile of satisfaction, Donna had made her decision. "I've thought about your proposal," she said as they prepared the evening meal together. Wayne looked up from the rabbit he was skinning, his expression carefully neutral. "And I accept," Donna said simply, "but I have conditions." Wayne set down his knife and gave her his full attention. "What kind of conditions?" "I want a real wedding," she said. "Not just a few words spoken in private, but a proper ceremony with witnesses. I want it known that this is a legitimate marriage, not just a convenient arrangement." Wayne nodded. "That's fair. What else?" "I want to keep Samuel's memory alive," she continued. "I won't pretend he never existed or that what we had wasn't important. If you can't accept that, then this won't work." "I wouldn't expect anything else," Wayne said. "A woman who could forget one husband so easily wouldn't be worth having in as a wife." His understanding brought tears to Donna's eyes. "There's one more thing," she said. "I want to go back to my cabin one more time, to get a few more of my things and to say goodbye properly. I know it's dangerous, but I need that closure." Wayne was quiet for a long moment, and she could see him weighing the risks. "All right," he said finally, "but we go together and we go armed. And if I say we leave immediately, no arguments." "Agreed," Donna said. They made the journey to Donna's cabin 3 days later, on a bright morning when the snow sparkled like diamonds in the sunlight. The wolves had been quiet for several nights, and Wayne thought it might be safe to make the trip if they were careful and didn't linger too long. The cabin looked smaller than Donna remembered, and somehow sadder, as if it knew it was being abandoned. Snow had blown in through cracks in the walls, and ice covered the windows, but the basic structure was still sound. Wayne kept watch while Donna gathered the few remaining possessions she wanted to keep: a few more quilts, some of Samuel's tools, and the small wooden box where she kept his letters and other mementos. As she moved through the rooms where she and Samuel had been happy together, Donna felt a profound sense of closure settling over her. This had been their home, the place where they had built their life together, but it was also the place where she had nearly died from loneliness and starvation. Leaving it behind felt like shedding an old skin, painful but necessary for growth. "Ready?" Wayne asked from the doorway. Donna took one last look around the cabin, fixing the details in her memory. Then she nodded. "Ready." They were halfway back to Wayne's cabin when they heard the howling. It started as a single voice, mournful and distant, but was quickly joined by others until the mountain rang with the sound of the pack. Wayne stopped abruptly, his hand moving to the rifle slung across his back. "They're close," he said grimly, "closer than they should be." The howling grew louder, and Donna could hear something else underneath it, a note of excitement or anticipation that made her blood run cold. These were not the distant calls of wolves going about their normal business. These were the voices of predators who had found prey. "We need to move," Wayne said, quickening his pace. "Stay close to me, and whatever happens, don't run. Running triggers their chase instinct." They had covered perhaps another quarter-mile when the first wolf appeared, a gray shadow moving through the trees parallel to their path. It was soon joined by another, and then another, until Donna could count at least 6 animals pacing them through the forest. "They're hunting," Wayne said, his voice tight with tension. "This isn't just curiosity. They've decided we're prey." The wolves began to close in, moving with the coordinated precision of a pack that had hunted together many times before. Wayne stopped and raised his rifle, but the animals were too smart to present clear targets, staying just out of range while continuing to circle closer. "When I tell you," Wayne said quietly, "I want you to climb that tree." He nodded toward a large pine with low-hanging branches about 20 feet ahead. "Get as high as you can and stay there until I say it's safe." Donna's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own voice. "What about you?" "I'll be fine," Wayne said, though his grim expression suggested otherwise. "Just do as I say." The largest wolf, a massive gray animal with yellow eyes and scarred flanks, stepped into the open path ahead of them. It stood there for a moment, studying them with predatory intelligence, then threw back its head and howled. The sound was answered immediately by the rest of the pack, and Donna realized with growing terror that they were completely surrounded. "Now," Wayne said sharply. "Climb. Now." Donna ran for the tree, her heavy winter clothing making her movements clumsy and slow. Behind her she heard Wayne's rifle crack once, twice, and then the snarling of angry wolves. She grabbed the lowest branch and hauled herself up, her muscles screaming with the effort. Below her, Wayne was backing toward the tree, his rifle ready, but his ammunition limited. The wolves pressed their attack, darting in and out, testing his defenses. Wayne managed to wound one with his third shot, sending it limping away with a yelp of pain, but the others only grew more aggressive. Donna watched in horror as the pack leader gathered itself for a charge, its powerful muscles bunched for the killing leap. Wayne's rifle clicked, empty, just as the wolf launched itself through the air. With no time to reload, he swung the weapon like a club, catching the animal across the skull with a blow that sent it tumbling into the snow. But the impact knocked him off balance, and another wolf seized the opportunity to dart in from the side. Donna screamed as she saw teeth flash in the sunlight, saw Wayne stumble and fall. But even as the wolf closed in for the kill, Wayne rolled aside and came up with a knife in his hand, the blade gleaming as he drove it deep into the animal's chest. The wounded wolf's death cry seemed to break the pack's resolve. The remaining animals backed away, their aggression replaced by uncertainty. Wayne stood slowly, blood running from a gash on his arm, but otherwise unharmed. He kept the knife ready as he backed toward the tree where Donna waited. "Stay up there a few more minutes," as he called to her. "Let them decide whether they want to try again." But the wolves had apparently had enough. One by one, they melted back into the forest, carrying their wounded with them. The pack leader lingered longest, its yellow eyes fixed on Wayne with what looked like grudging respect. Then it too disappeared, leaving only tracks in the snow to prove the encounter had been real. When Wayne finally gave her the all clear, Donna climbed down from the tree on shaking legs. The reality of how close they had come to death was just beginning to sink in, and she found herself trembling not just from cold, but from delayed shock. "Are you hurt?" Wayne asked, examining her with concern. "No," she managed to say, "but you are." She gestured to his wounded arm. Wayne looked down at the Yosh as if noticing it for the first time. "It's not deep," he said. "I'll live." They made the rest of the journey in tense silence, both of them constantly scanning the forest for signs of the pack's return. But the wolves seemed to have learned their lesson. The mountain was quiet except for the sound of their footsteps crunching through the snow. Back at the cabin, Donna tended to Wayne's wound while he sat patiently by the fire. The gash was indeed not deep, but it was long and ragged, and she cleaned it carefully before binding it with strips of clean cloth. "Thank you," she said as she tied off the bandage. "For what?" "For saving my life, for risking your own life to keep me safe." Wayne looked at her with those pale eyes, and she saw something in them that made her heart skip a beat. "That's what partners do," he said simply. "They take care of each other." The word partners hung between them, loaded with new meaning after their shared brush with death. They had faced danger together and survived, had protected each other when it mattered most. It was a bond that went deeper than convenience or necessity, something that felt solid and lasting and real. 2 weeks later, on the first truly warm day of spring, Donna Taylor became Donna Clark in a simple ceremony performed by the circuit preacher who made his rounds through the mountain settlements. Wayne had somehow managed to get word to the man, and he had agreed to make the journey up the mountain to perform the wedding. The ceremony was witnessed by 3 of Wayne's neighbors, mountain men who lived scattered through the high country and who had come to pay their respects to the woman who had won their friend's heart. They were rough men, weathered by years of hard living, but they treated Donna with courtesy and genuine warmth. As she spoke the words that made her Wayne's wife, Donna felt a sense of completion that she had not expected. This was not the passionate romance of her youth, but it was something perhaps more valuable. A partnership built on mutual respect, shared hardship, and genuine affection. They had chosen each other not in the heat of infatuation, but with clear eyes and practical minds, and that made their commitment feel solid and enduring. The people in the settlement below would talk, of course. They would say that she had married too quickly, that she had chosen poorly, that a woman like her had no business thinking she could find happiness with anyone but the one. But their words had lost their power to hurt her. She had learned that their opinions were worth less than the mountain wind, and that true strength came not from meeting their expectations, but from following her own path. As spring turned to summer and summer to autumn, Donna and Wayne built a life together that was rich in all the ways that mattered. They worked side by side, hunting and farming and preparing for the next winter. They talked and laughed and shared the small intimacies that make a marriage real. And when the first snows of their second winter together began to fall, Donna felt no fear, only gratitude for the warmth and safety of the home they had created together. She had kept her promise to Samuel, had survived against all odds, and found a way to live with dignity and strength. But she had also discovered something she had not expected, that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another, and that love can come in many forms, each valuable in its own way. The mountain had tested her and found her worthy, and she had emerged from that test not just alive, but transformed, stronger and wiser and more complete than she had ever been before.